Every course or training program needs learning goals. This video is about how to create effective learning goals so that your course or training program can be effective too. All learning goals should have 4 attributes. They should be specific, that is, they shouldn't be broad or vague. They should be meaningful. These should be goals that actually matter to the students and to you. They should be clear so that you can actually communicate these goals to other people. And they should actually be measurable so that you know whether or not you've achieved these goals or whether or not the students have achieved these goals. But before I talk more about each of these attributes, I want to take a step back and think about why we have goals in the first place. There are really 3 reasons. So anytime that you take, anytime that you're teaching a class, it's kind of like you're taking a group of students on a road trip and you're taking them to some new destination. If you don't know what that destination is, then that's a problem. You can't make any decisions about how to get there if you don't know where you're going. So it's not just the case that you're taking them to Arizona. You want to take them to, say, like the White Sands Desert or something. So the first thing is that the destination is important, and if you don't know the destination, then it's really hard to create an effective course. The second thing, which kind of rolls into that, is that having really good learning goals helps you make better decisions, both when you design the course and as you're teaching the course. So if you have very specific, measurable, clear, meaningful learning goals, then when it comes down to making decisions about what technology to use, about what activities to use in the course, what kinds of things the students are doing, how you're going to evaluate students, all of that depends on what your learning goals are. You might use the same activity in 2 different ways if you have different learning goals. And the final reason why having learning goals is really important is that it helps direct student effort. So if you communicate what these goals are to the students, it helps them study more effectively or pay attention more effectively, because they are going to be focused on achieving these goals as well. At least a portion of them, or some percentage of the time they're going to be focused on this. If they don't really know what they're going to be learning, then it makes them hard. It makes it difficult for them to learn that very thing. Okay, so good learning goals are, I said before, good learning goals are specific, they are meaningful, they are clear, and they are measurable. So let's start with specific. So a good rule of thumb is to frame your learning goals in terms of what students should be able to do at the end of the course. So students should be able to X. They should be able to do something. And this framing helps you focus on things that you can actually measure and things that you probably actually care about. You can use this phrasing even if you have, say, you're really focused on imparting some kind of knowledge. So if it's like, hey, I really want to teach students about ancient history. Well, I'm trying to teach them some knowledge about it so that they know about this time period, or they know about different civilizations that lived during this time period. But you can still use this what students should be able to do at the end of the course, because the question is really, what are they going to be able to do with that knowledge? Right? It's not just that they have that knowledge in their head somewhere. You want them to be able to maybe read and understand certain texts, or be able to write essays about certain topics, or this kind of thing. So that framing, first of all, is a little bit helpful. Bad words, or words to avoid when you're creating your learning goals, are words like about. So I'm going to teach students about, about the Big Bang. Well, teaching students about something, it's just too vague to really, it's more describing what you're going to do in the class, and it's less about what the ultimate learning goals are, what the ultimate outcomes are. Another bad word to avoid is appreciate. So sometimes I've read learning goals where it's like, well, I'm going to teach students to appreciate 18th century art. The problem is that this kind of phrasing, it doesn't, I don't know what appreciate means. And it's hard for the students to know like, how do I know whether I've appreciated something? And so in the back of your mind, you might think, well, I really hope they appreciate this, but you want to drill down into something more specific. The second attribute that we care about is meaningful. You want learning goals to be meaningful. In other words, you want them to matter to students. And one way of achieving this is to think about where students are starting from. What kinds of experiences are they bringing to the table? What kinds of knowledge and skills and cultural background? All this stuff, what are they bringing to the table? And then how does your course fit into their kind of future trajectories, whether it's maybe an academic thing, or it's a career-oriented thing, or it's just like a hobby or a lifestyle thing. Like how does your course fit into their learning trajectory? So sometimes you see problems with this if, for instance, in math classes, there are some traditional math curriculums that take students through this full sequence, and they finish high school and they've finished math and they've gotten A's in math, and then they start taking higher level math classes in college, let's say, and they realize the skills that they were learning in middle school and high school math, actually, those aren't the skills that matter. Those aren't the skills that are really useful in higher level mathematics, and those aren't the skills that, say, engineers and mathematicians and scientists use when applying math to problems. Like, they've never gone and done mathematical modeling problems, which is probably the broadest use of mathematics. So when you think about, are they meaningful, you also have to think about what it is that, say, an expert in this field, how do they think about things? What is it that they do? And are the goals that you're creating linked to those things that experts do? The third attribute that we have is clear. You want learning goals to be clear. And for this, we have to go back to one of the goals of our learning goals, which is to be able to communicate our learning goals to other people. So if you tell students what your learning goals are, you want them to be able to understand what those learning goals are. Kind of, maybe not immediately from the outset, but you want to try to minimize, say, vocabulary words that they might not understand. So you might, if you're communicating your learning goals to a student, you might say something like, we're going to learn about how plants, process sunlight into food, for instance, instead of saying, we're going to learn about photosynthesis. Well, you're going to teach them the word photosynthesis. But if they read that goal from the beginning, that's kind of meaningless to them if they don't already know anything about that. And eventually, too, if the course is sufficiently complex, you have multiple learning goals. So you can think about how to arrange these in a hierarchy, which goals are related to other goals, so that you're prioritizing kind of the most important goals, and then you're kind of linking goals up to each other. And that also makes it easier for other people to understand. The final key attribute that effective learning goals have is measurability. So good learning goals are measurable. That is, when you've achieved it. So we've already talked about, how making learning goals specific can make them more measurable. But you want to think about, as you're creating these learning goals, how can I possibly know if a student has accomplished this? And these measures don't have to be perfect. What we tend to think of when we think of assessments or measuring whether we've achieved something is, give those students a test, and if they pass the test, then that's great. And they've achieved these learning goals. But I think it's more effective to consider what kinds of activities can students do that you can get information from as the course goes along. So don't just think about evaluating students at the very end of the course. Think about evaluating students during the course, because if you understand that you tried to take them to this destination and they weren't able to get there, you can actually now adjust your instruction and say, okay, well, I gave them this little activity, and it's kind of evident that they're not able to do this. So now what am I going to do? How am I going to strategize to teach this same topic in a different way to help these students? And ideally, you want more than one measure of each goal, and you want to measure them in multiple ways. So you might ask a student to, say, write an essay on a topic, but then you also might have them, create a project or a presentation, or maybe solve a problem, solve a certain kind of problem, or collaborate with other students. So you want like multiple potential ways of seeing whether students have achieved the learning goals in the ideal case. Not every case is ideal. And the last thing I want to say about learning goals is just that you don't have to create them all at once, all in the beginning when you design your course. Usually when I go about creating a new course, I think about, okay, well, what are some learning goals that I'm interested in? And then I think about some activities that might help achieve those learning goals. And then I think about, well, okay, if I can achieve those learning goals with these activities, maybe these learning goals also do other things, and it gives me more ideas. So you're always kind of balancing learning goals with the activities that you're doing and the assessments that you have available to you and the technologies that you have. So it's okay to have some really crappy learning goals and to just kind of iterate on them and work on them over time. That's it for this video. I hope it was helpful for you. If you liked it and you thought, hey, this was helpful, please click the like button. And good luck on your learning goals, and I'll see you next time.